When I was in high school, we read the classic novel Moby Dick, as many high school students do, by Herman Melville. The book addressed a number of themes, but it all revolved around the occupation of whaling, killing whales for their oil, which they would render in fires from their blubber, used primarily for lamps because it burned cleanly. This industry prospered, it was very profitable from the late 1700s to the mid 1800s. So as famous as whaling was, it was really only big for a few years. A typical whaling ship was between 100 and 150 feet in length. Go out on the street and measure 100 feet and you can see that to be out in the middle of the ocean in a 100-foot ship is scary. And it was occupied by a crew of 16 to 30 men, all cramped into little teeny cubicles. The quarters were cramped because the boat carried all the wood for repairs at sea, the tools for all those repairs, the berths for sleeping, the food for the long voyages that would sometimes be a year and a half, 2 years, and all the rope, ship equipment, and hundreds of empty barrels to be filled with the oil rendered from the blubber of the whales they would kill. All of that, and those people, in 100 to 150 feet. Whoa. They had a substantial hearth, even a hearth to burn coal, actually more accurately coke, which is just treated coal, capable of shaping iron. In other words, they had a blacksmith on board who could shape iron into knives and harpoons, a burning hearth on a ship, a small ship. It also contained the enormous fireplaces and cauldrons where the blubber was placed and melted into the precious oil, which is what brought them out into the middle of the ocean. That's a lot in a small ship. These voyages lasted anywhere from 6 months to, the record, 11 years at sea. The food was variously described by the sailors as being anywhere from really unpleasant to revolting, want to throw up. So terrible food. They didn't serve fresh fruits and vegetables often at sea. It was their daily lot to live with rats, cockroaches, bed bugs, fleas, and more. The detailed descriptions are enough to nauseate you. The pay was terrible, with a common seaman, just starting off, receiving as little as they would divide it. They would divide the profits. They didn't say, we'll pay you this amount of money. They said, you'll get this portion of the profits. And a beginning seaman would get 1/350th of the total profits, sometimes as little as $25 for several years of grueling work in conditions that were barely tolerable, not to mention the high likelihood of sinking and dying. So you have to ask yourself, why would they do this? Why would somebody go out as an apprentice seaman and endure these conditions and be paid that little and maybe die? Why would men subject themselves to such physically miserable circumstances, waves that would blow over the hull of the ship, icicles that would form on the ropes with so little chance for material reward? I remember I was in high school. My English teacher asked the class this question. Why would they do that? And I can still remember my response. It was like a flash of lightning in my head. I said, it was the spirit of whaling. And he stopped. First time I'd ever seen him do that, and went, wow, yeah. And indeed it was. Men went out to challenge the unmeasurable and turbulent sea, the vastness of it, to fight against the largest creatures who have ever lived on Earth, including the dinosaurs, and to discover themselves They were captivated by the spirit of all those challenges, by the spirit of whaling. It was an exhilarating adventure that many men just could not miss. They just had to know. They had to embrace, to both fulfill and test themselves. To many men, the spirit of whaling would have meant nothing but endless and unpleasant labor, and of course, such men didn't go. But as I read the book, I could feel the thrill of it, the feeling that would come from having every fiber of my being pulled to its breaking point, because that's what happened, to the snapping point, but also to the point of knowing the full extent of who I am. That's why they did it. And that brings us to the spirit of parenting. If you put all the individual acts together, the constant attention to endless chores, like on a ship, scrubbing the deck, resistant children. At sea, that would be waves, wind, and storms. As a parent, the never-ending awareness of your responsibility to keep them safe. Just like at sea, the captain had to sail the right waters with the right charts. As a parent, the frequent arguments between children and parents, which at sea is like the unbearable chores, like dealing with rats and lice and bed bugs and fleas and on and on. The individual duties of parenting and sailing could be similarly unpleasant. If you consider all those individual responsibilities and obstacles, it would seem that any sensible human being would run from the job of parenting as fast as they could move, as though they were fleeing a bottomless pit of pain and despair, just like most people fled the idea of being in a whaling ship. And that's one way to see it. And it would be understandable, because I know many parents who just collapse under the burden of parenting and just give up and just say to the kids, not out loud, good luck, I hope you do well raising yourselves. A great number of parents do that. But, the spirit of whaling, the challenge, the testing, the fulfillment, and it's the same with the spirit of parenting. The overall feel, the power, the ability to raise a next generation to be happy and strong, meeting one of the world's greatest challenges and succeeding. In the process, learning who you are, not just for them. It's a secondary benefit. You learn who you are and help your children to become who they were meant to be with all their gifts. We must remember what the spirit of parenting is. The feeling, the driving inner passion, much like the spirit of whaling. Overall, sailing a ship is a matter of information, maps, sailing techniques, and more. Order, everything in its proper place, since a ship in chaos will go down in a storm, and real pride in the entire adventure. Similarly, parenting comes down to very simple principles, like love and teach, which includes kindness and caring and much teaching. That's it. And altogether, that's the spirit of it. The rest of the principles, like consistency, teaching, gratitude, the law of choice, the laws of responsibility and consequences, consistency again, the rules of listening, touching, looking, victimhood, zero tolerance for unloving behaviors, punctuality, and on and on. These principles are simply the tools or laws that make it possible for your children to be happy and for you to be effective. Those are the details that enable you to enjoy the spirit of the sailing. Get it? But all these tools and principles must be guided by remembering the spirit of parenting, love and teach, and an understanding of the indescribable opportunity we have to enable an entire generation to be happy and strong. Yeah, read the parenting book. That's informational. Watch the parenting training. Ask your questions about how to apply principles to individual situations that arise. But all of that is worthless without you feeling the spirit, the passion of what you're doing, without you loving what you do and the children you teach. A ship requires proper loading of provisions and cargo, meticulous order of all of its parts and equipment, cleanliness, accurate charts, and more. But if a ship has all those things and no true leader, a captain, the ship will still fail. Relationships, like a family, are the same. You can keep the rules, follow the directions, but it's the love of the parents that determine how it all fits together and functions most effectively. You can do this. You can learn to be a real parent, filled with the spirit, meaning the energy, the vision, the enthusiasm of your role, which will enable you to enjoy the smooth sailing and to thrive in the face of the storms.